Hello, my name is Peter Field. I'm a marketing consultant and I work with a number of blue chip companies around the world, advising them on how to improve the effectiveness of their marketing. The advice I offer is always evidence-based, and it's based on hard data that we get from case studies of effectiveness from around the world. I work with a UK database of global effectiveness case studies. And what it simply enables us to do is to examine how inputs to marketing, which could be strategic or media or indeed business choices, are able to influence the success of outcomes, by which we mean hard business success, long-term growth, profitability, and so on. And we can look at a number of metrics here. And the reason I'm talking to you now is to launch this book. The book is, again, an evidence-based perspective on what is going on in marketing today. Because when you actually look at the hard evidence, case study-based evidence of effectiveness and what is actually going on in the marketplace now, you come to some very strikingly different conclusions about what works best. And one of the most important issues that this book is essentially about is a shift in the way companies typically spend their marketing money from what I would refer to as brand building activity, that is to say, the creation of those powerful associations in consumers' minds that prime them to want to buy our brands. The shift from that kind of model of thinking to a model of thinking that says, well, in the modern digital era, what we can do is we can use people's data to serve an advertising message to them at the very last moment. The problem is that when you look at the hard evidence, and the database I work with shows a very clear and very marked reduction in typical levels of effectiveness. So this new model, this new way of thinking, this new shift of the balance of expenditure from long-term brand building to short-term sales activation is clearly out of kilter with best practice. Current practice is in some way wrong. And what's going on now is that there is a sweet spot. This data is very clear on this. There is a sweet spot that guides how we should balance the amount of money we spend in terms of long-term brand building with the amount of money that we spend on driving sales now. And we're all aware of the intense short-term commercial pressures on businesses these days from investors and other stakeholders. But the problem is that if you allow this pressure to be imposed on marketing without any balance to it, you drive marketing that is purely short-term driven. And this is happening, as I've said, on an industrial scale around the world. Because the most effective way is to balance brand building and activation. And the sweet spot is around about 60% brand building investment, 40% short-term sales activation. But we're already seeing in many developed economies that it has shifted to 50-50 or beyond. The New Zealand marketplace, already around about 40% of New Zealand's advertising money is spent only on digital activation. So if you add in other forms of activation, it's going to take it well beyond the 50% mark. And we know from the data that when this happens, very significant losses of effectiveness occur because we are not building our brands to drive long-term growth. But there are other really important commercial problems that arise, which are outlined in this book. And they are to do with factors that drive margin. One of the great benefits of brand building is its impact on pricing. And when we abandon brand building in order to drive short-term sales, we not only allow our brands to weaken, but we reduce our pricing power. And this is an immensely damaging factor on profitability. So we're seeing this played out in the data, again, on an industrial scale. It could not be more dangerous. So this book, which is aimed at the C-suite and hopefully will talk not just the language of marketing, but also the language of business, is an attempt, first of all, to warn businesses of the dangers that are being faced, which are real and present, but also to give businesses a way forward. The book will also outline 7 principles of effectiveness that again come from hard evidence-based analysis of success, not just the database I work with, but also the book cites other databases that again arrive at very consistent conclusions, because when you look at data based on objective, evidence-based analysis, you tend to come to very similar conclusions. So there are 7 principles for how to rejuvenate growth, drive growth, and they in a sense revolve around how to get the most out of brand building and how to balance brand building with sales activation. They are extremely important. They are vital if we want to reverse this declining effectiveness trend that we're observing in the marketplace. But they're not just about a campaign here or a campaign there. This is a much bigger and more important point than that. They are about the vitality of businesses. They're about the profitability of businesses. Because without brands, we lose competitive advantage. The short-term sales model sounds great, but it amounts to the abandonment of competitive advantage. It just creates bidding wars for the last minutes of attention of consumers who are about to buy. And we cannot win that. And there is a growing bank of evidence, a growing bank of case studies around the world of businesses, many of these famous blue chip global businesses, who have realized and spotted the danger to their profitability and their growth in time, have re-engaged with brand building and have seen the enormous benefits of doing so. So I urge you to get hold of this book from the Comms Council. They, I'm sure, will make it available to you. But above all, I urge you to, if you can, find the time to read it. It's not an immensely long read. It's designed to be succinct and readable, as I say, evidence-based. And I also urge you to share it with your teams and your colleagues and to put into action the principles that are there. Because, as I say, this is about the long-term survivability of brands and the businesses that own them. So I urge you please to read it. Thank you very much for listening to me.